My husband had another wife, and I was paying for their life. The perfect life was a lie. I used to believe that lies were loud, that if someone was cheating, stealing, or hiding another life, there would be obvious signs. Late night phone calls, lipstick on a collar, a strange perfume, secret messages. But I learned something that changed me forever. The most dangerous lies are the quiet ones, the ones hidden inside ordinary days. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old, and until recently, I believed I had the kind of marriage people envied. Daniel and I had been together for almost 14 years, married for 12. We owned a comfortable home in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. We didn't have children, not because we didn't want them. Life simply never lined up the way we'd planned. There was always another promotion, another move, another medical appointment. Eventually, we stopped talking about it. Instead, we poured our love into our careers and into each other. At least, that's what I thought. Daniel worked as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company. His job required frequent travel, sometimes 2 days, sometimes an entire week. He always had a reasonable explanation. Client meetings, trade conferences, training seminars. Nothing ever sounded suspicious. He always called me every night, always remembered birthdays, always brought home little gifts from airports. Chocolate, coffee mugs, keychains. Little reminders that he had been thinking about me. Looking back now, I wonder if those souvenirs weren't expressions of love. Maybe they were payments, tiny distractions to stop me from asking questions. Because while I was proudly displaying those airport magnets on our refrigerator, he was building another family. I just didn't know it yet. People often ask whether there were warning signs. There were, hundreds of them. I simply explained everyone away. Daniel had become strangely protective of his phone. He said confidential client information required extra security. Reasonable. He opened a second checking account. He claimed it was easier for tracking work expenses. Reasonable. He sometimes disappeared for entire weekends because of emergency client visits. Again, reasonable. Marriage teaches you something dangerous. Trust becomes automatic. Eventually, you stop verifying. You stop questioning. You stop noticing. That's exactly where deception grows. I worked as a senior accountant. Numbers were my profession. Errors practically screamed at me. But somehow, I never noticed the biggest financial lie happening inside my own marriage. Every month, Daniel transferred part of his salary into our joint account. The amount never changed. It looked perfectly consistent, perfectly responsible. What I didn't know was that another paycheck was disappearing somewhere else. Not another salary, another loan, another credit card, another mortgage, another house, another life. The first crack in the illusion appeared on a rainy Monday morning. It was nothing dramatic, just a phone call. I answered because Daniel was in the shower. Hello? There was silence. Then a woman's voice. Hi, is Daniel available? May I ask who's calling? Another pause. Oh, I must have the wrong number. She hung up immediately. When Daniel came downstairs, I casually mentioned it. He barely looked at me. Probably a client. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his coffee, left for work. I forgot about it. Or at least, I tried to. A week later, I noticed something odd. Daniel had begun locking the small filing cabinet in his home office. That cabinet had never been locked before. When I jokingly asked whether he was hiding state secrets, he laughed. just company contracts. His answer sounded perfectly normal. Yet, something inside me shifted. Not suspicion, curiosity, the kind that quietly settles in your chest. 2 months passed. Life continued. Work, dinner, laundry, weekend movies. Everything looked normal until the mail arrived. One envelope, no return address, no stamp. Someone had placed it directly inside our mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature. Only 6 words. Ask your husband about Maple Street. That was all. Maple Street. I stared at the page for several minutes. The name meant nothing to me. No relatives, no friends, no memories. When Daniel came home, I almost showed him. Almost. Instead, I slipped the paper into my purse. For the first time in 12 years, I kept a secret from my husband, and somehow, that tiny decision changed everything. That night, Daniel fell asleep almost instantly. I couldn't. The words kept echoing inside my head. Maple Street. At 2 in the morning, I quietly picked up my phone. I opened Google Maps, typed the address. There were dozens of Maple Streets across Illinois. I laughed at myself. This is ridiculous. I put my phone down, closed my eyes. Then another thought appeared. What if someone wanted me to find one specific Maple Street? What if someone knew something I didn't? I didn't sleep again that night. And by morning, for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I trusted the man eating breakfast across from me. I smiled anyway, because sometimes the most dangerous investigations begin with a smile. The first secret. The next morning, I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred together on my computer screen. Invoices that would normally take me minutes to review suddenly felt impossible to understand. One sentence kept replaying in my head. Ask your husband about Maple Street. Who had written it? Why not tell me directly? Why stay anonymous? And why now? By lunchtime, curiosity had become stronger than fear. I opened our online banking account. Not because I suspected Daniel. I simply wanted to reassure myself that everything was normal. At first, it was. Mortgage payment, electric bill, insurance, groceries. The same routine transactions I'd seen hundreds of times. Then one transfer caught my attention. $850. It happened every month, always on the third Friday. The recipient wasn't a person. It was simply listed as an account number. I never noticed it before. Maybe because the amount wasn't large enough to stand out. Maybe because trust makes you blind. That evening, I asked Danielle casually, "What's the $850 that leaves our account every month?" He didn't hesitate. My retirement investment. Didn't I already tell you? Maybe he had. Maybe he hadn't. Either way, his answer came too quickly, too smoothly, almost rehearsed. 3 days later, Daniel left for another business trip. Or at least, that's what he told me. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I walked into his home office. For years, I'd respected his privacy. That afternoon, privacy no longer felt more important than the truth. The filing cabinet was locked, just as before. I searched the desk. Nothing. Bookshelf. Nothing. Kitchen drawer. Nothing. Then I remembered something. Daniel had always hidden spare keys inside the garage. He thought I didn't know. 5 minutes later, the cabinet clicked open. Inside were neatly organized folders, tax records, insurance documents, work contracts. Everything looked ordinary until I reached the very back. A thin gray folder, no label. Inside, only 3 pieces of paper. The first was a property tax statement. The address made my heart stop. Maple Street. I read it again and again. Daniel's name was printed as the property owner. But we'd never owned another house. Not once. The second paper was even worse. A mortgage statement, monthly payment, $2,143. The loan balance exceeded $300,000. I couldn't breathe. We had never discussed buying another property. Never. The third document was a utility bill. Electricity, water, internet, all active. Someone was living there. I heard a car outside. For one terrifying second, I thought Daniel had come home. Instead, it was only our neighbor. Still, my hands shook so badly I almost dropped the papers. I photographed every document with my phone, returned everything exactly as I'd found it, locked the cabinet, put the key back in the garage. When I finished, my heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it. That night, Daniel called from his hotel, or what he claimed was his hotel. "Hey, sweetheart, I miss you already." His voice sounded warm, comforting, familiar, the same voice I trusted for over a decade. "I miss you too," I replied. The lie tasted bitter. He told me about meetings, clients, dinner with coworkers. I listened quietly. Then I asked one simple question. "What city are you in?" There was a pause. Just a second, but I noticed it. "Indianapolis." Another pause. "Why?" "No reason." He laughed. "You checking up on me?" I forced myself to laugh too. Of course not. But after we hung up, I opened his company's travel calendar. Employees often shared conference schedules online. There wasn't a single event in Indianapolis that week. Not one. Saturday morning arrived. I stood in my kitchen for almost an hour, staring at my car keys. Every instinct told me to stay home, to pretend I knew nothing, to let the mystery remain unsolved. Instead, I started the engine. The Maple Street address was only 45 minutes away. Rain fell steadily as I drove. Every mile felt heavier than the last. I kept inventing innocent explanations. Maybe Daniel rented the house to someone. Maybe he'd inherited it. Maybe there had been a paperwork mistake. I wanted to believe any explanation except the obvious one. Finally, I turned onto Maple Street. It was a quiet neighborhood. Children rode bicycles. A man watered his lawn. A golden retriever chased a tennis ball across a yard. Everything looked painfully ordinary. The address was near the end of the block. A beautiful two-story white house. Fresh flowers lined the front porch. A swing hung from a large oak tree. Someone clearly loved this home. I parked across the street. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then the front door opened. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, ran into the yard laughing. A woman followed her. She smiled as she called the child's name. For a brief moment, I felt relieved. Maybe this was simply a family renting Daniel's property. Then another car pulled into the driveway. A black SUV. I knew that vehicle better than my own reflection. It was Daniel's. He stepped out carrying grocery bags. The little girl screamed with excitement. "Daddy!" She ran straight into his arms. He lifted her high into the air, kissed her forehead. Then the woman walked over and kissed him on the lips. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even cry. Across the street, my husband wasn't pretending. He wasn't hiding. He looked completely at home, like the man I'd married had never truly been mine. The family I never knew existed. I don't remember driving away. To this day, I couldn't tell you which roads I took or how I made it home. Everything felt unreal. My hands were gripping the steering wheel but it was as if someone else was driving. One image kept replaying in my mind. The little girl running into Daniel's arms. Daddy, not Mister, not Uncle. Daddy. There was no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. The man I'd loved for 14 years had another family, a real family, a house, a child, and a woman who kissed him like she'd been doing it for years. I parked in our driveway and sat in silence. For almost an hour. My phone rang twice. Daniel. I couldn't answer. A text appeared moments later. Meeting ran longer than expected. I'll be home tomorrow evening. Love you. Love you. I stared at those words until the screen went dark. How many times had he sent that exact message while sitting in the other house? How many business trips had ended with bedtime stories instead of hotel rooms? How many anniversaries had he celebrated with someone else? Every memory I'd ever trusted suddenly felt contaminated. That night, I didn't cry. Not yet. Shock has a strange way of protecting you. Your heart refuses to believe what your eyes have already seen. Instead of breaking down, I became calm, very calm. The accountant inside me took over. If Daniel had hidden another family, he had hidden everything else too. Money, property, debt. Lies always leave paper trails. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. Public property records are surprisingly easy to access. I typed Daniel's full name into the search terminal. The clerk smiled politely. Looking for tax information? Yes, I lied. Seconds later, 3 properties appeared. Our home, the Maple Street house, and the third address I'd never seen before, a small apartment downtown. Purchased 7 years earlier. Paid in cash. Paid in cash. I felt my stomach tighten. Daniel and I had never had enough savings to buy an apartment outright. So where had the money come from? I paid for copies of every available document. The clerk handed me a thick envelope. Anything else? I almost said no. Then something stopped me. Can I search another name? Of course. What name? I looked at the Maple Street mortgage paperwork I'd photographed. The woman I'd seen wasn't listed there, but one name appeared as the emergency contact. Sarah Mitchell. I typed it carefully. The search results appeared almost instantly. One property. Maple Street. Owner, Sarah Mitchell. Co-owner, Daniel Carter. I felt every ounce of hope disappear. Co-owner. He hadn't been helping someone. He hadn't inherited the house. He had bought it together with her, like a married couple. Outside, I sat on a bench with the documents spread across my lap. An elderly woman nearby smiled at me. It's a beautiful day. I looked up. Was it? The sky was blue. Children were laughing in the park. People walked their dogs. The world hadn't changed. Mine had. That afternoon, I made the hardest decision of my life. I wasn't going to confront Daniel. Not yet. If I accused him now, he would lie, destroy evidence, move money, disappear. No, I needed answers. Every single one of them. Before he realized I knew. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. I documented everything, every credit card statement, every bank transfer, every business trip, every unexplained expense. Patterns began to emerge. Daniel always traveled on the second and fourth weekends of every month. Every time, he drove toward Maple Street. Never to a hotel, never to another city. Straight there. He had been living 2 completely different lives. One with me, one with Sarah. Then I noticed something else. Every Wednesday afternoon, he stopped at the same elementary school at exactly 3:15. I parked across the street one Wednesday. The school bell rang. Children flooded outside. And then the little girl appeared again. She saw Daniel, her face lit up. She ran into his arms. He hugged her tightly. Then they walked to the SUV together, laughing, talking, looking exactly like every happy father and daughter I'd ever seen. I should have hated that child, but I couldn't. She had done nothing wrong. She was innocent, just like I had been. As they drove away, another car pulled beside me. The driver's window rolled down. It was an older woman. She looked directly at me. "You've been here before." I froze. "I've seen you watching." I, she sighed. "You must be Emily." Every hair on my body stood up. "How do you know my name?" The woman looked away for a second, then back at me. "Because I've been waiting for you." She reached into her purse, pulled out a sealed envelope, and handed it through the window. "You deserve the truth." Before I could ask another question, she drove away. I stared at the envelope in my shaking hands. Across the front, written in neat handwriting, were 6 words. "He lied to both of you." I slowly opened it. Inside was a photograph that made my blood run cold. Daniel, standing in a tuxedo, holding Sarah's hands, in front of a church. As the minister smiled beside them, it wasn't just another relationship. It looked exactly like a wedding, the wedding that never existed. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost dropped the photograph. I stared at it again. Daniel was wearing a black tuxedo. Sarah stood beside him in a white wedding dress. Between them stood a smiling minister, holding an open Bible. Behind them, fresh flowers decorated the entrance of a small country church. It looked like every wedding album I'd ever seen. Except, I had never seen these pictures before, because they weren't supposed to exist. I turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a date. June 14. 8 years earlier, I stopped breathing. June 14th. That date wasn't random. It was our wedding anniversary. Every year, Daniel and I celebrated on June 14th. Dinner, flowers, a weekend getaway whenever we could. For 8 years, while he was buying me anniversary gifts, he had apparently been celebrating another anniversary too. I whispered to myself, "No, that's impossible." There had to be another explanation. A costume party, a charity event, a fake ceremony. Anything. Anything except the truth. I opened the rest of the envelope. There were more photographs. Daniel carrying a little girl on his shoulders. Sarah blowing out birthday candles. Christmas morning, a beach vacation. Halloween costumes, family barbecues. Dozens of moments. Years of memories, a complete family album. An entire life that had existed alongside mine, and I had never known. Then I noticed something else. One picture froze my heart. Daniel was wearing the same navy blue watch I had given him for our 10th anniversary. I remembered saving for months to buy it. He told me he wore it every day because it reminded him of me. He had worn it while smiling in family photos with another woman. That hurt more than the affair, because it meant he had carried pieces of my love into his lies. I drove home in complete silence. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like it weighed 100 pounds. Every traffic light felt endless. Every mile gave me another memory. Another excuse I believed. Another lie I'd accepted. How many times had he left our home saying, "I'll be back Sunday," only to spend the weekend reading bedtime stories to another child? That evening, Daniel called again. His voice sounded cheerful. "I'll be home around 7 tomorrow. I picked up something special for you." I almost laughed. Another souvenir. Another gift purchased with guilt. Sounds wonderful, I answered calmly. He had no idea I knew, and I intended to keep it that way. The next morning, I called in sick. Instead of going to work, I hired a private investigator. His name was Michael Lawson. He had spent 25 years as a police detective before opening his own agency. He listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. I've seen affairs. I've seen hidden children. I've seen secret gambling. But this, he slowly shook his head. This sounds much bigger. He slid a legal pad toward me. Before I take your case, I need you to answer one question. What is it? If I uncover something worse than another family, do you still want to know? I didn't hesitate. Yes. He nodded. Most people say that. Almost all of them regret it. 3 days later, Michael called. His voice sounded different. Serious. We need to meet. No phone. No emails. Come alone. An hour later, I was sitting across from him in a quiet coffee shop. He placed a thick folder on the table. I haven't finished investigating, but I found enough to concern me. He opened the folder. Bank statements, property records, business registrations, loan agreements. There were dozens of documents. Michael looked me straight in the eyes. Emily, your husband isn't just supporting two families. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What do you mean? He slid one document toward me. Daniel had taken out multiple personal loans, credit cards, lines of credit, second mortgages, all in his own name. The total debt exceeded $1.2 million. I stared at the number. That's impossible. We don't live like millionaires. Michael nodded slowly. I know, which means the money went somewhere. I swallowed hard. To Sarah? He shook his head. No, I don't think so. Then where? He was silent for several seconds. Then he spoke quietly. I think your husband has been hiding. A third life. The room suddenly felt very small. Another family, another house, another secret. I wasn't sure my heart could survive one more truth. But deep inside, I knew this nightmare was far from over. The woman who thought I was the mistress. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. Michael's last words echoed through my mind. I think your husband has been hiding. A third life. How could one man keep so many secrets? Another house, another family, over $1 million in debt. None of it made sense. Daniel earned a good salary, but not enough to support two homes, let alone three. Something bigger was happening. I just didn't know what it was. On Monday morning, Michael called again. I found something. Meet me at the office. When I arrived, he was standing beside a large whiteboard covered with photographs, addresses, timelines, and bank records. At the center was Daniel's picture. Red lines connected him to dozens of names. It looked like something out of a crime documentary. Michael pointed to the board. Your husband has spent 12 years making sure his two lives never overlapped. Separate phones, separate credit cards, separate insurance policies, separate mailing addresses. He planned everything. I stared at the board. This wasn't impulsive. No, Michael replied. This was organized. Then he handed me another folder. I think it's time you met Sarah. My heart skipped a beat. What? I don't mean today, but soon. Why? He looked at me for several seconds. Because I don't think she knows about you. I blinked. What? I've interviewed neighbors. They all believe Daniel and Sarah have been happily married for years. No one has ever heard your name. I couldn't believe it. So, she thinks she's his only wife? Michael nodded. And I suspect she would be just as shocked to meet you. 3 days later, everything changed. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't prepared. I was grocery shopping after work when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored those calls. Something told me to answer. Hello? A quiet female voice replied. Emily? Yes. There was a long pause. My name is Sarah. The world seemed to stop. I think we need to talk. An hour later, we met in a small cafe halfway between our homes. When Sarah walked in, she looked nothing like I'd imagined. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't the woman who had stolen my husband. She looked exhausted, nervous, terrified, just like me. For several awkward seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she placed a wedding album on the table. My daughter found this hidden in Daniel's closet. She opened it. Every page showed their wedding ceremony. Family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, normal life. Then she looked directly into my eyes. I thought you were his mistress. I almost laughed. Instead, I pulled my own wedding album from my bag. I placed it beside hers. Same groom, same smile, different bride. Sarah covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Oh my God, she whispered. We were both wives. For the next 3 hours, we compared our lives. Every business trip Daniel had taken, every birthday, every holiday, every excuse. Slowly, the truth came together. When he told me he was traveling for work, he was with Sarah. When he told Sarah he had conferences, he was with me. He had divided every week with military precision. Neither of us had suspected a thing. Then Sarah said something that made my blood run cold. Emily, there's something else. She reached into her purse, removed several unopened envelopes. They're from the bank. I found them yesterday. I opened the first one. Final notice. The second. Foreclosure warning. The third. Account in default. Every loan was overdue. Every payment had stopped. I looked at Sarah. When did Daniel stop paying? She answered quietly. About 3 months ago. 3 months? That was exactly when he'd started transferring even more money from our joint account. He hadn't been solving his financial problems. He'd been desperately trying to keep his lies alive. And now, everything was collapsing. Sarah looked at me with tears streaming down her face. What do we do now? For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel alone. I looked across the table at the woman I'd once believed was my enemy. She wasn't. She was another victim. And together, we were finally going to uncover the truth Daniel had spent 12 years hiding. The truth started falling apart. The strange thing about betrayal is that once the first lie is exposed, the rest begin to crumble on their own. You no longer have to search for the truth. It starts finding you. Sarah and I sat in that cafe until it closed. Hours earlier, we had been complete strangers. Women whose lives had unknowingly revolved around the same man. Now, we were comparing calendars like detectives trying to solve a murder. Only the victim wasn't dead. It was the life we'd both believed was real. We spread our phones across the table. Photos, messages, receipts. Every memory Daniel had carefully created suddenly became evidence. I thought he was in Denver that weekend, Sarah whispered. I checked my phone. He told me he was visiting his mother. She looked up. He was with you. I nodded slowly. And he told me he was with you. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. It wasn't just the cheating anymore. Daniel had built two complete realities, and somehow he had kept them perfectly separated for over a decade. When we finally left the cafe, Sarah touched my arm. Emily, can I ask you something? Of course. Did he ever ask you for money? The question caught me off guard. No, never directly. She lowered her eyes. He asked me several times. My stomach tightened. How much? She gave a weak smile. I stopped counting. He always had a reason. A delayed bonus, a business investment, an unexpected tax bill. I believed him. How much, Sarah? She took a deep breath. Almost $200,000. I couldn't speak. That wasn't savings. That was years of sacrifice, years of trust, gone. The next morning, Michael called us both into his office. He had added even more documents to the whiteboard. This case has changed, he said. It isn't only about a double life anymore. He placed a folder in front of us. I ran a background check on Daniel's finances. Sarah looked nervous. What did you find? Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a stack of loan applications across the desk. Every application contained the same signature, Daniel's. But something else caught my attention. The employment information. It wasn't true. On several applications, Daniel claimed he earned almost twice his real salary. On others, he listed businesses that didn't exist. He lied to the banks, I whispered. Michael nodded. And not just once. He did it repeatedly. Sarah covered her mouth. Is that illegal? Michael looked at both of us. Very. Then he opened another file. This arrived this morning. It was a letter from an attorney. Not mine. Not Sarah's, Daniel's. Michael had obtained it through a legal contact who was investigating financial fraud involving several lenders. I read only the first paragraph before my vision blurred. Notice of pending civil action. Several financial institutions were preparing lawsuits against Daniel. The total claimed debt had grown even larger. Interest, penalties, missed payments. The amount now exceeded $1.5 million. Sarah whispered. He's bankrupt. Michael slowly shook his head. No, he's hiding. That afternoon, neither Sarah nor I could reach Daniel. His phone went straight to voicemail. His office claimed he was traveling. His co-workers hadn't seen him in days. Even his mother said she hadn't heard from him. It was as if he'd disappeared. Then, just before sunset, Sarah's daughter called her. Mama, I think Daddy forgot his tablet. Sarah looked at me. We need to check it. The tablet was sitting on the kitchen counter at the Maple Street house. It wasn't locked. Apparently, Daniel had never imagined anyone else would touch it. The email app was still open. Sarah tapped the screen. Hundreds of unread messages appeared. Most were from banks, collection agencies, law firms. But one email stood out. Its subject line read, "Final transfer confirmed." Sarah opened it. Attached was a receipt. A wire transfer. $300,000. Sent only 4 days earlier. Not to Sarah. Not to me. Not to any bank. To a private account in another country. We looked at each other in stunned silence. Michael leaned closer to the screen. That account, he frowned. I've seen that country used before. For what? He looked at us with a grim expression. People moving money before they disappear. The room fell silent. For the first time, we weren't asking whether Daniel had another secret. We were asking something far more terrifying. Had he been planning to leave us all along? The man we thought we knew. For a long time, Neither Sarah nor I said a word. The tablet lay on the kitchen table between us. That single wire transfer changed everything. Until that moment, I believed Daniel was desperately trying to keep two lives from collapsing. Now, it looked as though he had already chosen to abandon both of them. Michael broke the silence. Don't touch anything else. He carefully photographed the screen with his phone. The timestamp, the account number, the confirmation code. All of these could become evidence. Sarah looked at him. So, he was running away? Michael sighed. I don't know. But people don't move hundreds of thousands of dollars overseas unless they're trying to protect it from someone. The banks? Possibly. And us? He didn't answer. That silence told us everything. Just as we were about to leave, Sarah's daughter, Lily, walked into the kitchen. She was carrying a small cardboard box. Daddy said this was mine, she said innocently. But I don't want it. Sarah smiled gently. What is it, sweetheart? I don't know. He said to keep it safe. My heart skipped a beat. Michael knelt beside Lily. May I see it? She nodded and handed him the box. Inside were toy cars, a few drawings, and a sealed envelope. On the front, in Daniel's handwriting, were 4 words. Open if I disappear. The room went completely silent. Sarah slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. She began reading aloud. If you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I know you'll hate me. I deserve that. But before you judge me, you need to know one thing. She stopped reading. Her hands were trembling. I took the letter and continued. Nothing about my life has been as simple as it looked. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Every lie created another lie. Eventually, I couldn't escape them. There was no apology, no explanation, only vague sentences. It felt less like a confession and more like someone trying to justify the unjustifiable. Michael frowned. He's leaving out the important parts. At the bottom of the letter was one final sentence. There's a storage unit on Lincoln Avenue. Everything you need to understand is there. Sarah looked at me. What does that mean? I don't know. Michael folded the letter carefully. I think we're about to find out. The storage facility was only 20 minutes away. It was already dark when we arrived. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. The manager checked the rental records. Yes. Unit 214. Registered to Daniel Carter. Monthly payments stopped last week. He handed us temporary access after confirming Sarah's legal documents connected to Daniel. The heavy metal door rolled upward with a loud scrape. The light flickered on. None of us moved. The unit wasn't filled with furniture or family keepsakes. It was filled with filing cabinets, boxes, plastic containers, everything carefully labeled by year, almost like an archive. Michael whispered, "This man documented everything." We opened the first cabinet. Tax returns, business contracts, insurance policies, perfectly organized. The second cabinet contained passports, old driver's licenses, expired company IDs, every version of Daniel from the past 15 years. Then Sarah gasped. There, on the top shelf, sat a small black fireproof safe. It wasn't locked. Inside were 3 passports. One belonged to Daniel. The second had Daniel's photograph, but a completely different name, David Collins. The third passport showed the same face again. Another identity, Michael Grant. I stared in disbelief. 3 passports, 3 names, 3 lives. Michael looked at us with a grim expression. I don't think your husband was just living a double life. He slowly closed the safe. I think he's been pretending to be different people. The room suddenly felt colder. Every answer we found created an even bigger question. Who was Daniel Carter? Really? The truth behind Daniel Carter. I couldn't stop staring at the passports. 3 different names, 3 different signatures, 3 different birthdays, but the same face, the same blue eyes, the same man, or at least the man I thought I knew. Michael carefully placed the passports back into the safe. We're not taking anything. Not yet. If this becomes a criminal investigation, the authorities will need to see everything exactly as it is. Sarah looked at him. So, who is he? Michael exhaled slowly. I honestly don't know. But we're about to find out. In the back corner of the storage unit sat an old steel filing cabinet. Unlike everything else, it wasn't organized. Someone had been searching through it recently. Folders were scattered across the floor. One drawer was still half open. Michael pulled out a thick brown envelope. Across the front were 3 handwritten words. Birth certificate. Inside was a single document. I leaned closer. The name at the top wasn't Daniel Carter. It was Daniel James Harper. Sarah frowned. Harper? I've never heard that last name. Neither had I. According to the certificate, Daniel had been born in a small town in Missouri. Not Illinois. Not Chicago. Everything we'd ever been told about his childhood was false. We spent the next hour reading through old documents. School records, medical papers, military registration forms. None of them matched the stories Daniel had told either of us. He had claimed to be an only child. The paperwork listed 2 brothers. He had said his father died when he was 10. Records showed his father had lived until Daniel was almost 30. He had told us he graduated from college. There wasn't a single diploma. Every chapter of his life had been rewritten. Then Michael stopped. He pulled a faded newspaper clipping from one of the folders. His face changed immediately. What is it? I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the article. The headline read, Local couple killed in highway crash. The date was 22 years earlier. The victims' names, James and Rebecca Carter. I looked at Michael. Those are Daniel's parents. He shook his head. No. They're the people whose identity he later used. The room went silent. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. You mean? Michael nodded. I don't think Daniel Carter ever existed. Sarah sank into a chair. Oh my God. So who did we marry? Michael looked down at the documents. I think you both married. Daniel James Harper. The Carter identity appears to have been created after the accident. I couldn't process what he was saying. For 14 years, I'd celebrated birthdays that weren't real. Met relatives who apparently weren't relatives. Visited places connected to a childhood that had never happened. Had I ever actually known my husband? Then something else caught my eye. At the bottom of the envelope was a small spiral notebook. The cover was worn. Inside, every page was handwritten. Dates, addresses, names, payments, appointments, everything. It wasn't a diary. It was a schedule. A schedule for 2 completely different lives. Monday and Tuesday with Emily. Wednesday night at the apartment. Thursday through Sunday with Sarah. Anniversaries, birthdays, holiday rotations. Every minute had been planned years in advance. I felt physically sick. He hadn't been improvising. He'd been managing us like appointments on a calendar. As Michael turned another page, A folded photograph slipped onto the floor. He picked it up. It showed a much younger Daniel standing beside an older man in a dark suit. Written on the back were 6 words. The man who taught me everything. "Who is that?" Sarah asked. Michael stared at the photograph for several seconds. "I don't know. But I have a feeling he's the reason none of this started by accident." For the first time, our investigation was no longer about exposing an unfaithful husband. It had become something much darker. Something that reached far beyond our marriage. And somewhere out there, Daniel knew we were getting closer. The phone call. The drive home was silent. Neither Sarah nor I could process what we'd just discovered. The man we had loved. The man we had trusted. The man who had promised to spend the rest of his life with each of us might not even be the person whose name appeared on our marriage certificates. I kept replaying one thought. If his identity was fake, what else had he lied about? At exactly 9:43 that night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. "Hello?" There was heavy breathing. Then Daniel spoke. "Emily?" I froze. "Where are you?" "I'm sorry." His voice sounded exhausted, older somehow. "I know you've been looking for me." I didn't answer. He continued. "I never wanted you to find the storage unit." My heart skipped a beat. How did he know? "How long have you been watching us?" I asked. A long silence followed. Long enough, I turned on the speaker. Sarah and Michael listened without saying a word. Daniel sighed. "You've probably figured out by now, my name wasn't always Daniel Carter." I clenched the phone tighter. "So, who are you?" Another pause. "My real name is Daniel Harper." Hearing him admit it out loud made everything feel real. "You lied to us for 12 years. I know. You married 2 women. I know. You destroyed 2 families." His voice cracked. "I know." For the first time, he sounded ashamed. But shame couldn't erase the damage. "Why?" I whispered. There was another long silence. When he finally answered, his words surprised me. "I never planned for any of this." I almost laughed. "You expect me to believe that?" "No, but it's the truth." He took a slow breath. "I fell in love with you. And then I couldn't let go of Sarah. You should have chosen. I know. But every time I tried, I lost my courage." I closed my eyes. "Courage. You called 12 years of lies a lack of courage." He didn't respond. Instead, he said quietly, "There's something you still don't know." I looked at Michael. He slowly shook his head, signaling me to keep listening. "What? The money? It wasn't for another woman. It wasn't gambling. It wasn't luxury." I frowned. "Then where did it go?" Daniel whispered. "To my brother." The room fell completely silent. "My brother has been in prison for 15 years. He owed dangerous people long before he was arrested. I spent years paying those debts. I thought if I kept paying, they'd leave my family alone." Sarah spoke for the first time. "What family?" "You had two." Daniel answered quietly. "Both of yours." I felt anger rising again. "So that's supposed to excuse everything?" "No, it doesn't. I'm just telling you the truth. The first truth I've told in years." Michael leaned closer to the phone. "Daniel, I'm Michael Lawson. I've been investigating you." Daniel gave a tired laugh. I figured. "You've done good work." Michael didn't smile. "If what you're saying is true, why run?" Daniel became silent again. Then he said something none of us expected. "Because someone else has the rest of the money." Every instinct in my body told me something was wrong. What do you mean? I wasn't working alone. My stomach tightened. The man in the photograph? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally, yes. He taught me how to disappear. He taught me how to build new identities. But he also controlled everything. So where is he now? Michael asked. I don't know. And if he thinks I've talked, he'll come after all of you. The line went quiet. Daniel. No answer. Daniel. Then the call disconnected. I immediately tried calling back. The number no longer existed. It had already been deactivated. Michael slowly lowered the phone. He didn't just disappear. He was running from someone. Sarah looked at me. Do you believe him? I stared out the window into the darkness. For the first time since this nightmare began, I honestly didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that the story wasn't over. And somewhere, Daniel Harper was still alive. The final truth for 3 days. There was nothing. No phone calls, no emails, no messages. It was as if Daniel had vanished from the face of the earth. Sarah returned home to Lily, trying to create some sense of normalcy for her daughter. I went back to work. At least, I tried to. But every spreadsheet reminded me of the financial disaster Daniel had left behind. Every quiet moment brought another memory, another lie, another promise, another piece of a marriage that had never truly existed. On the fourth morning, Michael called. We found him. My heart nearly stopped. Where? A small motel outside St. Louis. Is he alive? There was a brief pause. Yes, but the police got there first. An hour later, Sarah and I met Michael outside the local police station. The investigation had already begun. Daniel had turned himself in voluntarily. He hadn't tried to escape. He hadn't resisted. According to the officers, he walked into the station carrying a single duffel bag and asked to speak with detectives. Inside that bag were laptops, financial records, passports, and several handwritten notebooks. He surrendered everything, including himself. Michael later explained what investigators believed had happened. Daniel Harper had not been a professional criminal mastermind. He had been a man who made one terrible decision after another. Years earlier, overwhelmed by debt and desperate to leave behind a troubled past, he had changed his identity illegally. He convinced himself it was temporary. Then he met me. Instead of confessing, he kept pretending. Years later, while our marriage was already struggling, he met Sarah. Instead of ending one relationship before beginning another, he chose another lie. Every year that followed required even more lies to protect the old ones. Loans covered other loans. Credit cards paid older debts. New identities hid old mistakes. His life became a house built entirely from deception. And eventually, every wall collapsed. Several months passed before I saw him again. It was in a courtroom. Daniel looked nothing like the confident man I had married. His hair had turned gray. His shoulders were bent. His eyes never left the floor. When the judge asked whether he wished to make a statement, he stood slowly. Then he looked first at Sarah, then at me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I spent years telling myself I was protecting everyone. But the truth is, I was only protecting myself. I was too afraid to lose either of you. So I ended up losing everyone. The courtroom remained silent. There was nothing left to say. The legal process lasted almost a year. Daniel was convicted of multiple financial crimes, identity fraud, and falsifying loan applications. The banks eventually recovered some of their losses by selling the properties. Sarah and I lost money, a lot of it. But we didn't lose ourselves. That mattered more. Something unexpected happened during that year. Sarah and I became friends, not because of Daniel, but because only we truly understood what the other had survived. We celebrated Lily's 7th birthday together. When she asked why I was there, Sarah smiled. "This is our friend Emily." Lily hugged me without asking another question. Children have an incredible ability to accept love without needing complicated explanations. People often ask me if I hate Daniel. The answer surprises them. No, I don't hate him. Hatred would mean allowing him to occupy my heart forever. Instead, I chose something much harder. I chose to let him go. Not because he deserved peace, but because I deserve mine. If there's one lesson I learned from everything that happened, it's this. Trust is one of the most beautiful gifts you can give another person. But trust should never require you to ignore your instincts. Love should never demand blindness. And the strongest relationships are not built on perfect people. They're built on honest ones. Because one lie can destroy a marriage. 1,000 lies can destroy an entire life. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminds even one person to trust their intuition, ask difficult questions, or value honesty above comfort, then perhaps something good came from the darkest chapter of my life.